I've got a solo viola loaded in, and on the edit page, let's explore the sample strip. Now here, we can tune the pitch of the sample, and this is different than here when we use this to transpose the MIDI notes at the part level. Here we're actually transposing the sample. And we can command click to bring it back to unity value of 0. We can fine tune if we want to detune by sense, and this sets the pitch bend range. Now here we have different sampling modes for how the samples are stretched. Resampling is the default, and it's what you're going to want for a natural type of sound on orchestral sounds like this. It transposes based on where in the range the keys are triggered. Now if we use this, we can get some nice granular effects. So if you want to get experimental, you can do that. And I'm just going to command click here to bring them back to the defaults. And we can use an analysis mode here to, and this will depend on the samples that are loaded in. It'll depend how long it'll take. But this will allow us to get into some interesting formant shifting, which can be useful to get a kind of darker sound or brighter sound without actually using a filter. And we can use this by dialing this down or up. So this is actually interesting and useful to darken up or brighten up a sound, and the phrase mode isn't particularly relevant for Philharmonic sounds. It's a sample tank engine function for when we're working with loops and preserving transients. They basically do the same thing here. And we can pan the individual samples as well. We have a round robin freeze button. When there are round robin samples, meaning multiple samples of the same note, it'll alternate between the different samples unless you press this button in which case it'll freeze it on the current instance of the round robin sample and use only that one. And when we're using multiple articulation instruments, we can choose which articulation we want to apply these parameters to. In this case, it's just a single articulation instrument, but in some of the key switch versions, you can select which of the versions you want to edit. Now let me just command click here to snap these back to their defaults, and I'm going to go to resampling mode, and we'll look at the velocity strip, and this allows us to determine how the velocity of the notes we trigger, meaning how hard we hit our keyboard, how that affects various parameters in the synth engine. Now, the most common one we're used to working with is velocity to amplitude, meaning the harder we strike the note, the louder the sound is. But we can alter that here. For example, this is the normal one. So if I hit quieter, I get quieter notes, and louder, I get louder notes. But I can do it in reverse. So now when I hit quieter, I'll get loud notes. And when I hit harder, I'll get soft notes, or I can widen the range to get a much bigger dynamic range between quiet and loud. Now here, we can modulate pitch with velocity. So if I hit the same note, it'll modulate the pitch based on how hard I hit. So, interesting. And you'll notice that if you want to modulate the pitch in that kind of way, this is the value to do it at. When you hold a note and move the pitch here, it won't have any effect since this affects only note-on events, but this affects the note itself, so sustaining a note will allow this to modulate the pitch. And I'll just command-click to return it to default. Now we have a filter section here with standard type of filters, high-pass, low-pass. We have a couple of specialty filters. The formant filter is interesting, and standard filter type controls and filtered slopes. But here we can have velocity affect the filter. So for example, let's say I'll dial up some resonance and I'll dial the filter down a bit. We can hear it affect things. So velocity is affecting the amount of resonance and filter control. So interesting. Now the LFO depth and envelope sustain pertain to these other sections, which we're going to look at next.